Victor Thompson was a man who had achieved greatness through perseverance, hard work, and unwavering determination. As a successful entrepreneur and philanthropist, he had climbed his way to the top despite facing countless challenges, most of which stemmed from the color of his skin. This wasn't his first encounter with prejudice, but today was supposed to be different. Today, he was attending a prestigious conference as the main sponsor, an event he had invested a significant amount of his wealth and reputation in. Little did he know that this event would test him in ways he had never imagined. As he approached the grand conference hall, Victor took in the imposing building before him. The entrance was decorated with banners showcasing the event's logo, and the lobby was bustling with attendees, each dressed in their finest attire. He felt a surge of pride. It wasn't every day that he, a black man from a humble background, would be welcomed as a distinguished guest and sponsor of an event like this. Yet, as he stepped through the doors, a familiar tension crept over him, a feeling he couldn't shake, one that reminded him that he was often seen differently in these spaces. Victor was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that had been crafted just for this occasion. He wanted to look his best, not only to represent his company, but also to show others that he belonged here. However, as he walked toward the registration desk, he noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Conversations around him seemed to hush as people noticed him, some glancing at him with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. He straightened his shoulders, refusing to let their looks affect him. After all, he was here as the main sponsor. They had no reason to question his presence. Approaching the reception desk, he greeted the woman behind the counter with a polite smile and handed her his invitation. "Hello, I'm Victor Thompson, here for the conference," he said, his voice calm and composed. The receptionist barely looked up, giving him a quick glance before her gaze shifted back to her computer screen. Her expression was one of irritation, as if he was bothering her with his presence. She frowned slightly and, with a dismissive tone, asked, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" The question hit Victor like a slap. He was taken aback, but quickly regained his composure. "Yes, I am," he replied, his voice firm but polite. "I'm the main sponsor of this event." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips, and she continued typing on her keyboard without giving him another glance. "Just a moment, sir," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism. Victor felt a wave of frustration wash over him, but he remained calm, reminding himself that he was here for a greater purpose. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching. Two security guards, tall and imposing in their black suits, walked up to the desk. Their expressions were stern, and their presence was intimidating. One of them glanced at the receptionist, who gave him a slight nod, before turning his attention to Victor. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave," the guard said coldly, his eyes narrowing as he looked Victor up and down, making an immediate and unfounded judgment about him. Victor's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process what was happening. He felt a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling within him. "There's been a mistake," he said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to keep his emotions in check. "I am Victor Thompson. I'm the main sponsor of this event. I have every right to be here." The guards exchanged a look, one of them barely suppressing a smirk, and the second guard said with open contempt, "We don't care who you are. This is a private event, and we have orders to remove any unauthorized individuals." His words were laced with disdain, his tone making it clear that he had already decided that Victor didn't belong here. Before Victor could say anything more, the guards grabbed him by the arms, their grips firm and unyielding. His protests fell on deaf ears as they began escorting him out of the hall, ignoring his attempts to explain. The attendees around them watched in silence, some with looks of pity, others with indifference, but no one stepped forward to defend him. Victor felt a wave of humiliation wash over him as they led him through the hall, past people who either didn't care or assumed he was in the wrong. He could feel the stares boring into him, each one a reminder of the prejudice that still existed, no matter how successful he became. The lavish surroundings that had once filled him with pride now felt like a cold, hostile environment. one that reminded him that he was still seen as an outsider. As the guards shoved him out of the door and into the cold air outside, Victor stood there in disbelief, his heart heavy with frustration and hurt. He looked around, taking in the curious glances of passers-by, some who looked at him with pity, others who simply ignored him. He felt a storm of emotions rising within him: anger, humiliation, sadness. Despite all his achievements, he was still facing the same treatment he had encountered throughout his life. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the anger that boiled inside him. He scrolled through his contacts, searching for someone who could help him make sense of what had just happened. Memories flooded his mind, moments from his past when he had been judged, dismissed, or underestimated because of his skin color. He thought he had grown used to it, that his success had finally earned him a place where he would be seen for who he was. But today, he realized that the world still hadn't changed as much as he had hoped. Finally, he found the contact he was looking for and hit call. As he waited for the call to connect, he felt a renewed sense of determination rising within him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about proving to the world that he belonged here, that he had earned his place through hard work and dedication. He wasn't going to let this moment of injustice define him. He would stand tall, not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. As the phone rang, Victor made a silent promise to himself. He would return to that conference, not just as a guest, but as a force to be reckoned with. He would teach them a lesson they would never forget, a lesson about respect, equality, and resilience. This was just the beginning of a story that would challenge and inspire those who heard it. Victor paced back and forth outside the conference hall, the weight of the humiliating incident still pressing heavily on his chest. He could feel his pulse thundering in his temples, each heartbeat a painful reminder of the injustice he had just endured. The lavish building loomed behind him, a symbol of wealth, influence, and power that seemed determined to keep him out. But Victor wasn't one to surrender easily. His journey to success had been riddled with obstacles, each one more daunting than the last, and he had conquered them all. Today would be no different. As he waited for his assistant to pick up, he couldn't help but replay the recent events in his mind. Every sneer, every dismissive glance, every word dripping with prejudice echoed in his head. He had invested not only his money, but also his heart and soul into sponsoring this event. It was supposed to be a celebration of innovation and progress, a chance for people from different walks of life to come together, share ideas, and make a difference. Yet here he was, cast out simply because of his skin color. The phone finally connected, and his assistant's familiar voice came through. "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right?" "No, it's not," Victor replied, his voice barely concealing the anger simmering beneath the surface. He quickly explained what had just happened, detailing the humiliation he had faced and the blatant disregard for his identity and contributions. There was a pause on the other end, and he could hear his assistant taking in his words, the shock evident in her silence. Finally, she said, "This is unacceptable. I'll reach out to the organizers immediately. They need to understand who you are and the mistake they've made." Victor took a deep breath, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. "I don't just want an apology," he said, his voice firm. "I want them to understand the gravity of what they did. This isn't just about me. It's about all the people who have been overlooked, dismissed, and disrespected simply because they look different." His assistant agreed wholeheartedly, and they discussed the plan. She would reach out to the event organizers and demand an immediate meeting. Victor was determined to confront the people responsible, not to seek revenge, but to spark a conversation about respect, equality, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. As he ended the call, Victor felt a renewed sense of purpose filling him. The humiliation he had experienced was painful, but it had also ignited a fire within him. This was an opportunity to turn his pain into something meaningful, to transform a moment of adversity into a lesson that could resonate far beyond the walls of this conference hall. Determined not to be defeated, he pulled out his phone again and opened his social media accounts. With a deep breath, he began to type, sharing his experience in a post that was both raw and honest. He recounted how he had been removed from the event he was sponsoring, how he had been judged and dismissed based on appearances alone. But more importantly, he shared his belief in the power of resilience, the importance of standing up against injustice, and his commitment to creating a world where everyone was treated with respect. Within minutes, his post began to gain traction. Comments flooded in from people around the world, many expressing outrage, others sharing their own experiences of prejudice and discrimination. His words resonated with people from all backgrounds, sparking a conversation that was long overdue. As he scrolled through the comments, Victor felt a sense of validation and solidarity. He wasn't alone in this fight. His story was one among millions, a testament to the strength and resilience of those who had been underestimated and overlooked. It was clear that people were hungry for change, and Victor was determined to be a catalyst for that change. The next day, Victor received a call from the head organizer of the event. She sounded flustered, her voice trembling as she'd apologized profusely for what had happened. "Mr. Thompson, we are deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. We had no idea. This is unacceptable. Please, allow us to make it right." Victor listened to her apology, but he wasn't satisfied. An apology was only the first step. "I appreciate your words," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But I believe this incident highlights a deeper issue. I didn't come here just for an apology. I came to make a difference, to foster understanding and progress. And I think this situation is an opportunity for us all to reflect on our biases and the ways we treat others." The organizer was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by his response. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Thompson. We failed to uphold the values this event is supposed to represent. I would be honored if you would join us tomorrow and share your story with our attendees. I think it would be an incredibly powerful message for everyone involved." Victor considered her offer. Part of him wanted to decline, to walk away and leave them to deal with the aftermath of their actions, but he knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. This was his chance to turn a painful experience into a lesson, to show others the importance of empathy, understanding, and equality. He accepted her invitation, determined to make the most of this unexpected platform. The next day, Victor arrived at the conference hall with a renewed sense of purpose. As he walked through the entrance, the same receptionist from the day before greeted him, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and remorse. She mumbled an apology, barely able to meet his gaze, and Victor simply nodded, choosing not to dwell on her mistake. He had bigger things to focus on. As he entered the hall, he noticed that many of the attendees were already seated, their attention focused on the stage where the organizer was introducing him. She spoke about the values of the event, the importance of diversity, and how Victor's story was a powerful reminder of the work that still needed to be done. When Victor took the stage, he could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, each one waiting to hear what he had to say. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts, and began to speak. "Yesterday, I was removed from this very conference, an event I sponsored, simply because of the way I look. I was judged, dismissed, and humiliated, but I'm not here to dwell on what happened. I'm here to share a lesson that I hope will resonate with all of you." The room was silent, every attendee hanging on his words. He spoke about his journey, the obstacles he had faced, and the prejudice he had encountered time and again. He shared stories of his early career, moments when he had been underestimated, and the resilience it took to rise above it all. His voice was calm, yet filled with conviction, each word resonating with a truth that was impossible to ignore. "I believe that true progress comes from understanding and empathy," he continued. "We all have biases, whether we realize it or not. But it's our responsibility to challenge those biases, to see each other for who we truly are, not just for what we look like. My story is just one of many, but I hope it serves as a reminder that we are all deserving of respect and dignity." As he spoke, he could see the expressions on the faces of those around him changing. Some looked guilty, others reflective. His words were having an impact, reaching into the hearts of people who had never truly considered the experiences of someone like him. By the time he finished, the room was filled with a respectful silence. He could feel the weight of his words lingering in the air, each one a reminder of the importance of compassion and understanding. Slowly, the audience began to clap, the sound building into a standing ovation that filled the hall. Victor stood there, taking it all in, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal satisfaction. This was more than just a victory for him. It was a step forward in a much larger journey. He had turned his pain into purpose, using his platform to inspire change and challenge the status quo. As he left the stage, people approached him, some offering apologies, others thanking him for his words. The organizer pulled him aside, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for sharing your story. It's clear we still have a lot to learn, and I hope we can continue working together to make this event a place where everyone feels valued." Victor nodded, feeling a sense of closure. He had come here to make a difference, and in the end, he had done just that. This wasn't the end of his story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would continue to fight for equality, dignity, and respect for all. As he left the conference that day, Victor knew that his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of adversity. But he was ready for them, armed with the knowledge that he had the power to turn any hardship into a lesson, any pain into purpose. And that, he realized, was the true meaning of resilience. Victor had left the conference with a sense of closure, but as he walked through the bustling streets of the city that evening, a deeper resolve began to take root within him. The standing ovation, the heartfelt apologies, and the gratitude from the audience were a step in the right direction, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. He knew the biases he faced ran deeper than a single event or a few individuals. His speech had stirred emotions and sparked reflection, but true change required more than words. It required action. As he reflected on the day's events, Victor found himself at a crossroads. He could move on, comforted by the impact he had made in the moment, or he could dig deeper, leveraging his influence and resources to confront the systemic issues that had made him a target of prejudice in the first place. He chose the latter. If this conference had taught him anything, it was that he could not afford to be silent, not just for his own sake, but for the countless others who lacked the platform to speak up. Over dinner with a few close friends that evening, he shared his vision. "I don't want this to end here," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "I want to create something that goes beyond a single speech or event. I want to start a foundation, one that's dedicated to breaking down the barriers that still exist for people like us, barriers in business, education, and society at large." His friends listened intently, nodding in agreement. They had been by his side throughout his journey, witnessing the prejudice he had faced and admiring the strength with which he had overcome it. One of his closest friends, Elena, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for fighting injustice, leaned forward, her eyes filled with enthusiasm. "Victor, that's an incredible idea. I can't think of anyone better suited to lead this charge. You've always been resilient, but you also have the empathy and understanding to inspire real change." The support of his friends fortified his resolve. That night, they brainstormed ideas, sketching out the blueprint for a foundation that would advocate for equality and empower individuals from marginalized communities. They discussed programs that would provide mentorship to young entrepreneurs, scholarships for students from underrepresented backgrounds, and workshops that would educate corporate leaders on diversity and inclusion. Victor's mind raced with possibilities. He envisioned a network of professionals and allies who would work together to dismantle the systemic biases that hindered progress. He wanted to create a space where people could learn, grow, and collaborate, regardless of their race, gender, or socioeconomic background. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Real change never was. But he was ready to commit his time, energy, and resources to this mission. In the days that followed, Victor began putting his plans into action. He reached out to his contacts in the business world, seeking partnerships and gathering support for his foundation. Many were eager to join him, inspired by his vision and moved by the courage he had shown in confronting prejudice at the conference. Some were business leaders who had witnessed discrimination in their own circles and were ready to support a cause that aligned with their values. Others were individuals who had faced similar struggles and were eager to help him create a world where future generations would not have to endure the same hardships. Victor's passion for the project was contagious, and soon his foundation began to take shape. He named it the Pathway Initiative, a name that represented his goal of creating clear and accessible paths for individuals from all backgrounds to succeed. He envisioned the Pathway Initiative as more than just an organization. He saw it as a movement, a force that would challenge the status quo and foster a society where everyone was given a fair chance. The first initiative he launched was a mentorship program aimed at young Black professionals entering industries where diversity was still lacking. He reached out to seasoned professionals across various fields: finance, technology, law, and media, inviting them to become mentors. Each mentor was carefully selected not only for their expertise, but also for their commitment to creating an inclusive and supportive environment for their mentees. Victor's own experience with mentorship had been invaluable. Early in his career, he had been fortunate enough to find a mentor who believed in him, who had looked beyond his skin color and seen his potential. That mentor had taught him how to navigate corporate spaces, how to stand firm in the face of adversity, and how to hold on to his integrity no matter the challenges he faced. Victor knew firsthand the power of mentorship, and he was determined to offer that same support to others. The response to the mentorship program was overwhelming. Applications poured in from young professionals eager to learn, to grow, and to find guidance from someone who understood their journey. Victor was deeply moved by their stories, each one a testament to the strength and resilience that often went unrecognized. He saw himself in many of these young people, the same ambition, the same drive, and the same frustration with a world that seemed determined to overlook them. One mentee, a young woman named Maya, wrote to Victor directly. She shared her struggles of breaking into the tech industry, where she often found herself as the only Black woman in the room. She described the isolation she felt, the dismissive attitudes she encountered, and the internal battle between her passion for her work and the constant microaggressions she faced. Her words were raw and honest, and Victor felt a deep connection to her story. He invited Maya to meet with him in person, eager to offer her the support and guidance she deserved. During their meeting, he listened to her experiences, offering advice based on his own journey and encouraging her to stay true to herself. "You belong in this industry," he told her firmly. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. You have a voice, and it's important. The world needs people like you who are unafraid to break barriers and push for change." Maya left their meeting with a renewed sense of confidence, inspired by Victor's words and grateful for the opportunity to work with someone who understood her struggles. She became one of the many success stories that would emerge from the Pathway Initiative, a living testament to the power of mentorship and the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued. But Victor knew that mentorship alone was not enough. The Pathway Initiative needed to address the systemic issues that perpetuated discrimination and exclusion. He launched a series of workshops and seminars aimed at educating corporate leaders on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. These sessions weren't just about checking boxes or fulfilling quotas. They were about fostering genuine understanding and empathy. Victor brought in experts from various fields: psychologists, sociologists, business leaders, and civil rights activists, to lead discussions on topics like implicit bias, privilege, and cultural competence. The workshops challenged participants to confront their own biases, to examine the ways in which their companies could do better, and to commit to meaningful change. Some attendees resisted, uncomfortable with the topics being discussed, but Victor remained patient. He understood that change was difficult, especially for those who had never had to question their own perspectives. But he believed that if he could plant even a single seed of empathy or self-awareness in each participant, it would be a step toward creating a more inclusive society. The impact of these workshops began to ripple outward. Companies that had once been reluctant to embrace diversity began implementing new policies and practices that prioritized equity and inclusion. Leaders who had attended the sessions began mentoring employees from diverse backgrounds, fostering a culture of support and empowerment within their organizations. The Pathway Initiative was creating waves, slowly but surely changing the landscape of corporate culture. One day, Victor received an invitation to return to the same conference where he had been humiliated just months before. The organizers had seen the impact of the Pathway Initiative and wanted him to speak as a guest of honor. They acknowledged the mistakes they had made and were eager to showcase the progress they had made in fostering a more inclusive environment. Victor accepted the invitation, but this time he was returning not as a sponsor, but as a leader, a change-maker, and a man who had transformed adversity into purpose. He knew that his presence would send a powerful message, not just to the attendees, but to everyone who had ever felt excluded or dismissed. His journey was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of turning pain into action. As he prepared his speech for the event, Victor reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought of the young professionals he was mentoring, the corporate leaders he had challenged, and the countless lives that the Pathway Initiative had touched. His heart swelled with pride and gratitude, knowing that he had taken a painful experience and turned it into something transformative. When he stepped onto the stage, the audience rose in applause, a standing ovation that filled the hall with a palpable sense of respect and admiration. This time, Victor was not an outsider. He was a pioneer, a beacon of hope, and a symbol of change. And as he began to speak, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey, one that would continue to inspire, uplift, and empower those who needed it most. In that moment, Victor realized that he had found his true purpose, one that extended far beyond personal success. He was here to pave the way for others, to ensure that future generations would not have to fight the same battles he had faced. And as he looked out over the crowd, he knew, without a doubt, that his story was far from over. Victor's work with the Pathway Initiative quickly became a beacon of hope, not only for young professionals, but also for communities facing deep-rooted challenges across the country. As the organization gained traction, the ripple effects of his efforts began to extend far beyond the initial mentorship and corporate workshops. His foundation was no longer just a response to a personal incident. It was blossoming into a movement that touched countless lives, each one contributing to a larger story of resilience and empowerment. With his background in business and his dedication to social justice, Victor was uniquely positioned to navigate spaces that often seemed at odds with each other. He knew that real, lasting change would require more than just inspirational speeches and networking events. It demanded systemic solutions, initiatives that would address inequalities at their roots, rather than just treating the symptoms. He wanted the Pathway Initiative to build bridges where others saw divides, to unite communities that had been fractured by prejudice and misunderstanding. One evening, as he reviewed the organization's growing list of programs, Victor's phone rang. It was Elena, his close friend and collaborator, who had been instrumental in helping him shape the vision of the Pathway Initiative. Her voice was filled with excitement as she explained an idea she had been working on. "Victor, we need to go beyond mentorship and education," she said passionately. "I've been thinking about creating a coalition, a partnership with local governments, educational institutions, and non-profits across the country. Imagine what we could do if we pooled our resources and worked together on a national level." Victor listened intently, a smile spreading across his face as he recognized the potential in her words. "You're absolutely right, Elena," he replied. "If we're going to make a real impact, we need to work together with those who are already in the trenches, fighting for change in their own communities. Let's build a coalition, a network of allies dedicated to a common purpose." With that, the seeds for the Pathway Coalition were planted. Over the next several months, Victor and Elena worked tirelessly to build partnerships with organizations and institutions across the country. They reached out to grassroots groups working on social justice issues, educational foundations focused on bridging the achievement gap, and local governments interested in promoting diversity and inclusion initiatives. They met with community leaders, educators, and activists, each bringing their own unique perspectives and experiences to the table. One of the first communities they engaged with was a small town in the Midwest that had been struggling with racial tension for years. The town's population was divided, and mistrust between different racial and ethnic groups had grown over time. Schools were segregated along socioeconomic lines, and the community's children had few opportunities to interact with people who looked different from them. The Pathway Coalition decided to start here, recognizing that if they could foster unity in this divided town, they could do it anywhere. Victor and Elena began by hosting a series of community forums, inviting residents to share their experiences and concerns. These gatherings were raw and emotional, with people expressing frustrations and fears that had been simmering for years. Some were hesitant to open up, fearing backlash or misunderstanding, but Victor's presence seemed to have a calming effect. He listened with genuine empathy, his responses thoughtful and measured, encouraging others to see the common humanity in each other. During one particularly tense meeting, a young black man named Jamal stood up and shared his story. Jamal had grown up in the town, and though he loved his home, he felt like he had to constantly prove his worth to those around him. He talked about the way people would cross the street to avoid him, or how he was followed around in stores, even when he was just there to buy groceries. As he spoke, an older white man named Frank, who had lived in the town his entire life, raised his hand. "I have to admit," Frank began, his voice rough and hesitant, "I've always been wary around people I don't know, especially if they're different from me. It's just how I was raised. But listening to you now, Jamal, I see how my actions might have hurt you. And for that, I'm sorry." The room fell silent as the two men looked at each other, the weight of their words lingering in the air. For the first time, they were truly seeing each other, not as symbols of their respective backgrounds, but as human beings with their own struggles and fears. That moment marked a turning point, not only for Jamal and Frank, but for the entire community. Inspired by this breakthrough, Victor and Elena proposed a community mentorship program that would pair young people with mentors from different backgrounds. The goal was to foster understanding and empathy by creating relationships that transcended racial and economic divides. The program included regular gatherings, workshops on cultural awareness, and team-building activities that encouraged participants to work together toward common goals. The results were profound. Young people who had grown up with preconceived notions about the other side began to form genuine friendships. They learned about each other's cultures, dreams, and challenges, discovering that they had far more in common than they ever realized. Parents who had once viewed each other with suspicion started attending events together, volunteering side by side for community projects, and supporting each other's families. The Pathway Coalition's work in the town became a model for similar programs across the country. Media outlets began to take notice, and soon Victor found himself being invited to speak at conferences, universities, and town halls. He shared the coalition's story, emphasizing that the journey toward unity was not without its challenges, but that every small step made a difference. Victor's message was clear. True change required each person to take a step toward understanding, to be willing to listen, even when it was uncomfortable. He spoke about the importance of empathy, of seeing beyond stereotypes, and of recognizing the inherent dignity in every individual. His words resonated with audiences, sparking conversations that continued long after he had left the stage. Meanwhile, the Pathway Coalition's programs continued to expand. Victor and his team developed initiatives focused on educational reform, aimed at addressing the systemic inequalities that affected students of color and students from low-income families. They worked to provide scholarships, access to quality tutoring, and support networks for students who often felt marginalized within the traditional education system. One of the coalition's most impactful projects was a scholarship fund named after Victor's late mother, who had been his greatest inspiration. She had taught him the importance of perseverance, kindness, and self-respect, values that he carried with him every day. The Angela Thompson Scholarship Fund was established to provide financial support to students who demonstrated not only academic excellence, but also a commitment to making a positive impact in their communities. Victor was deeply involved in selecting the scholarship recipients, personally reviewing each application and learning about the students' stories. He saw himself in many of them, young people with big dreams and the determination to overcome any obstacle in their path. These were students who had faced adversity but remained undeterred, driven by a desire to succeed not only for themselves, but for their families and communities. One of the first scholarship recipients, a young woman named Alana, had grown up in a neighborhood plagued by gang violence and poverty. Despite the odds, she excelled in school, earning top grades and becoming a role model for her younger siblings. Alana wrote a moving essay about her dream of becoming a civil rights lawyer, inspired by her experiences and her desire to fight for justice. When Victor read her essay, he was struck by her resilience and her unwavering commitment to making a difference. He knew that Alana would go on to do incredible things, and he felt honored to play a small role in helping her reach her goals. The scholarship allowed her to attend her dream university, and over the next few years, she flourished, becoming a leader on campus and an advocate for underrepresented students. Victor kept in touch with Alana, offering guidance and support as she navigated the challenges of college life. Watching her succeed reminded him of why he had started the Pathway Coalition in the first place. Each scholarship recipient, each mentorship success story, each community transformed was a testament to the power of resilience and the impact of standing up for what was right. But not everyone welcomed Victor's work with open arms. As the Pathway Coalition grew in influence, it attracted criticism from those who were uncomfortable with its mission. Some accused Victor of stirring up division, claiming that his efforts to promote diversity and inclusion were unnecessary or even harmful. Others questioned his intentions, suggesting that he was only seeking attention or profit. Victor was hurt by these accusations, but he refused to let them deter him. He understood that change was rarely comfortable and that those who benefited from the status quo would often resist efforts to disrupt it. He had faced adversity before, and he would face it again, but he remained steadfast in his commitment to the coalition's mission. He knew that the work he was doing was important, that it was making a difference, and that he had a responsibility to continue fighting for a better future. Over time, Victor's resilience began to inspire others. People who had once been skeptical of the Pathway Coalition came to see the positive impact it was having on their communities. They witnessed the friendships that formed across racial and socioeconomic lines, the students who gained access to new opportunities, and the families who found common ground despite their differences. Slowly but surely, minds were changing, and the coalition's message of unity and empowerment was spreading. In moments of doubt, Victor reminded himself of the people he was helping, the students who dreamed of a brighter future, the communities that were healing, and the individuals who found their voices through the coalition's programs. He thought of Alana, Jamal, and Frank, of the bridges they had built and the hope they represented. His journey had not been easy, but it was worth every challenge, every setback, and every moment of pain. Victor had set out to make a difference, and as he looked at the world around him, he knew that he was succeeding. The Pathway Coalition was more than just an organization. It was a testament to the power of resilience, empathy, and determination. And as he continued his work, he remained committed to building a world where everyone, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to thrive. The success of the Pathway Coalition didn't just change the lives of individuals, it began to transform entire communities. What had started as a response to a personal injustice was now a powerful movement that bridged divides, lifted spirits, and inspired action across the country. People who had never thought of themselves as activists found themselves championing equality and diversity in their workplaces, schools, and neighborhoods. And the coalition's impact was only just beginning to unfold. Victor Thompson found himself busier than ever, juggling his responsibilities as CEO of his company with his role as founder and leader of the Pathway Coalition. He traveled frequently, visiting cities and towns where his organization had taken root, meeting with local leaders, and listening to the stories of the people they had reached. He wanted to keep his finger on the pulse of his mission, to understand how it was evolving, and to stay connected to the very individuals whose lives had inspired him to build this movement in the first place. One of his most memorable trips was to a rural town in the South, where the coalition had recently launched an initiative in partnership with local schools. This town had a long history of racial tension, and many of its residents harbored lingering mistrust and suspicion across racial lines. The coalition's program aimed to bring students and their families together through a series of workshops, cultural exchange events, and community service projects. Victor was greeted warmly by the town's mayor, a man named Mr. Langston, who was excited to show him the progress they'd made. As they toured the local high school, Mr. Langston explained that the coalition's work had been met with mixed reactions at first. Some folks here were resistant to change, he admitted. They didn't see the value in these programs, and there was a lot of skepticism. But over time, things began to shift. One of the high school's teachers, Mrs. Harper, joined them during the tour. She was an older woman with a stern but kind face, someone who had dedicated her life to educating the town's youth. She looked at Victor with gratitude in her eyes. "This program has changed everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been teaching here for over 30 years, and I've never seen the students so engaged, so eager to learn about each other. They're breaking down walls that have stood for generations." Mrs. Harper led Victor into a classroom where students from different backgrounds were working together on a mural that would be displayed in the town square. The mural depicted scenes of unity, resilience, and hope, with images representing the town's history as well as its future. The students were engrossed in their work, laughing and chatting as they painted. It was a simple project, but its impact was profound. These young people, who might have never spoken to each other outside of school, were forming connections that would last a lifetime. One student, a young Latino boy named Carlos, noticed Victor standing near the doorway and approached him shyly. "Are you Mr. Thompson?" he asked, his eyes wide with admiration. When Victor nodded, Carlos broke into a grin. "Thank you for this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to feel like I didn't belong here, but now I feel like this is my home too." Victor placed a reassuring hand on Carlos's shoulder, humbled by the boy's words. He knew that the coalition's work was making a difference, but moments like this reminded him just how deeply it was affecting people's lives. He spent the rest of the afternoon talking with the students, listening to their stories, and marveling at the courage they displayed as they navigated the complexities of their young lives. These were future leaders, the next generation of changemakers, and he felt honored to play a part in their journeys. As Victor left the school that day, he couldn't help but think about his own experiences growing up. He, too, had felt out of place at times, constantly striving to prove himself in a world that seemed determined to judge him by his appearance rather than his character. But unlike Carlos, he hadn't had a program like the Pathway Coalition to support him. He had fought his battles alone, relying on his inner strength and the love of his mother to guide him. The thought that he could now offer young people a sense of belonging and purpose filled him with pride and gratitude. Over the next few months, the coalition continued to expand its reach. Victor and his team launched new initiatives aimed at addressing specific issues in different communities. In one urban area with a high rate of youth unemployment, they created a job readiness program that taught essential skills like resume building, interview techniques, and financial literacy. The program also included internships with local businesses, giving young people the experience they needed to enter the workforce with confidence. In another community, the coalition partnered with local law enforcement to develop a bridge-building program designed to foster trust between police officers and residents. The program encouraged open dialogue, where officers and community members could speak candidly about their fears, frustrations, and hopes. These conversations were often difficult, with both sides grappling with years of distrust and pain. But as they continued to meet, share meals, and work on projects together, They began to see each other as allies rather than adversaries. The coalition's influence extended beyond the programs themselves. It began to inspire other organizations and businesses to take a closer look at their own practices and policies. Victor was often invited to consult with corporations seeking to improve their diversity and inclusion efforts, and he used these opportunities to challenge leaders to go beyond superficial changes. He pushed them to examine the structural barriers within their organizations, to commit to fair hiring practices, and to create spaces where employees from all backgrounds felt valued and supported. One company, a major tech firm, invited Victor to speak at a leadership summit attended by executives from across the industry. As he stood before the audience, he spoke openly about his journey, the obstacles he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He challenged the leaders in the room to reflect on their own biases, to question the assumptions they held about others, and to take responsibility for creating a workplace culture that fostered respect and inclusion. "You have the power to make a difference," he told them. "It's not just about numbers on a report or ticking boxes on a checklist. Real change requires empathy, commitment, and a willingness to listen. It requires you to see each person in your organization as an individual with unique strengths, dreams, and challenges. If you can do that, you'll not only create a better company, you'll contribute to a better world." His words resonated with the audience, sparking a lively discussion that continued long after his speech had ended. Several executives approached him afterward, thanking him for his candor and asking for advice on how they could implement meaningful changes within their own organizations. Victor was encouraged by their enthusiasm, knowing that each of these leaders had the potential to influence thousands of employees and shape corporate culture in a positive way. Despite the coalition's successes, Victor knew that there was still much work to be done. He was aware of the challenges that lay ahead, the resistance they would continue to face, and the moments of discouragement that would inevitably come. But he also knew that every victory, no matter how small, was a step toward a more just and inclusive society. One night, after a particularly long day, Victor sat in his office, reflecting on the journey he had taken since the day he was humiliated at that first conference. He thought about how that painful experience had led him to create something far greater than himself, something that had the power to transform lives and bring people together. He realized that his story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about using adversity as a catalyst for change. As he sat there, his mind drifted to the future. He imagined a world where organizations like the Pathway Coalition were no longer necessary, where diversity and inclusion were so deeply ingrained in society that no one ever felt the need to prove their worth based on anything other than their character and abilities. He knew that this vision might seem like a distant dream, but he believed that it was possible. He believed in the power of resilience, in the strength of community, and in the potential for people to grow and change. In that moment, Victor made a promise to himself. He would continue this work, no matter how difficult or discouraging it might become. He would keep building bridges, keep inspiring others, and keep fighting for a world where everyone was given the chance to thrive. He would not stop until the values of empathy, justice, and equality were no longer ideals to strive for, but the foundation upon which society was built. As he left his office that night, Victor felt a profound sense of purpose. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever lay ahead. He was ready to face the challenges, to celebrate the victories, and to stand beside the people who had joined him in this mission. And as he walked into the night, he carried with him the hopes, dreams, and stories of all those who believed in a better future. The Pathway Coalition was more than an organization. It was a legacy, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that one person's courage could indeed spark a movement capable of changing the world. And for Victor, that was more than enough to keep going. Years had passed since that pivotal day when Victor Thompson had been unjustly removed from the conference hall. What had once been a deeply personal wound had grown into a nationwide movement that would eventually reach beyond the borders of the United States. The Pathway Coalition had become a beacon of hope, resilience, and unity, touching lives and reshaping communities in ways that Victor could have never imagined. His journey from humiliation to empowerment had not only changed his life, but had set in motion a chain of events that inspired others to strive for justice, equity, and a world that was fair for everyone. Victor's legacy was now woven into the fabric of countless communities, each transformed by the coalition's work. However, the coalition's impact extended far beyond the individual lives it had touched. It had become a transformative force, influencing policies and inspiring systemic change on a national scale. Leaders in business, education, and government had come to recognize the Pathway Coalition as a vital ally in the fight for equality, and Victor had become a respected voice for those who had been overlooked, dismissed, or discriminated against. His story was not just his own anymore. It was a story that belonged to everyone who believed in a more inclusive and compassionate world. One morning, as Victor reviewed the latest reports on the coalition's progress, he received an invitation that would mark a new chapter in his journey. The United Nations had taken notice of the Pathway Coalition's accomplishments and wanted to recognize its contribution to global social justice initiatives. They invited Victor to speak at their annual assembly in Geneva, alongside other leaders and advocates who were working to promote peace, equity, and human rights around the world. The invitation was an acknowledgement of the coalition's impact and a testament to the far-reaching influence of Victor's work. The thought of standing before a global audience, sharing the coalition's story on an international stage, was both exhilarating and humbling. Victor knew that this was an opportunity to amplify the message of the Pathway Coalition, to show the world what could be achieved when people came together in the spirit of empathy and mutual respect. He accepted the invitation with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to use this platform to inspire even more change. In the weeks leading up to the assembly, Victor spent countless hours preparing his speech. He wanted every word to resonate, to capture not only the journey of the Pathway Coalition, but also the spirit of resilience that had driven its success. He thought about the people whose lives had inspired him, the students, families, and community leaders who had joined him in this movement. He wanted to honor their stories, to ensure that their voices were heard on the global stage. When the day of the assembly arrived, Victor felt a mixture of anticipation and responsibility. He was no longer the same man who had walked into that conference hall years ago, seeking validation and acceptance. Now he stood as a leader, a visionary, and an advocate for those who had been denied their rightful place in society. He felt the weight of this responsibility, but he also felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given the chance to turn his pain into purpose, and he knew that this moment was about more than just his own journey. It was about the future he was helping to create. As he took the stage in the Grand Hall, surrounded by representatives from nations around the world, Victor's heart swelled with pride. He looked out over the audience, seeing faces from every corner of the globe, each one representing a unique culture, language, and experience. This was the world he had dreamed of, a world where diversity was celebrated, where differences were seen as strengths, and where every individual was given the chance to thrive. He began his speech by sharing the story of that fateful day when he had been turned away from the conference. He spoke openly about the pain of that experience, the humiliation, and the frustration of being judged solely on the color of his skin. But he didn't dwell on the injustice. Instead, he focused on what had come after, on the decision to turn that pain into something meaningful. He shared how the Pathway Coalition had grown from a single moment of adversity into a movement that empowered individuals, united communities, and challenged the status quo. "I realized," he said, his voice steady and strong, "that the real power of resilience is not just in surviving hardship, but in transforming it. It's in taking the moments that seek to break us and using them to build something greater than ourselves. That's what the Pathway Coalition is all about, creating pathways where there were none, opening doors that have been shut for far too long, and showing the world that unity is stronger than division." The audience listened in rapt attention as Victor spoke of the coalition's programs, the mentorships that had lifted young people out of poverty, the workshops that had transformed corporate cultures, and the partnerships that had bridged divides in communities fractured by prejudice. He shared stories of individuals who had found hope, courage, and a sense of belonging through the coalition's work. He spoke of Alana, the scholarship recipient who had gone on to become a civil rights lawyer, and of Carlos, the young man who had once felt out of place in his own hometown, but had grown to become a leader in his community. Victor's speech wasn't just about achievements, it was a call to action. He urged the international community to recognize the importance of inclusion, to see the value in every individual, and to commit to building societies where diversity was not just tolerated but celebrated. The path to equality is long and often challenging, he said, his voice echoing through the hall. But each step we take brings us closer to a world where everyone can stand tall, without fear, without shame, and without having to prove their worth. As he finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. Delegates from across the world stood to honor him, moved by his story and inspired by his message. Victor had spoken not only to their minds, but to their hearts, reminding them that the fight for justice and equality was a universal one, a fight that transcended borders, cultures, and languages. After his speech, Victor was approached by leaders and activists from around the world, each one eager to learn more about the Pathway Coalition and explore opportunities for collaboration. Representatives from countries as diverse as Brazil, India, and Sweden expressed interest in bringing the coalition's programs to their own communities, recognizing the potential for these initiatives to foster unity and resilience in their own societies. Victor was deeply moved by their enthusiasm, knowing that the coalition's mission was now spreading beyond his own nation's borders. Over the next year, the Pathway Coalition expanded internationally, adapting its programs to meet the unique needs of communities around the globe. In South Africa, they partnered with local organizations to address the lingering effects of apartheid, offering mentorship and educational programs that empowered young people to rise above historical inequalities. In the Middle East, they launched a series of intercultural exchange programs that brought together young people from different religious and ethnic backgrounds, fostering understanding and respect in a region marked by conflict. In Europe, they worked with companies to create more inclusive workplaces, challenging traditional biases and promoting diversity at every level. Victor's vision was now a global reality, a testament to the power of resilience and the strength of human connection. But even as the coalition's reach grew, he remained committed to the core values that had inspired its creation. He continued to meet with students, to listen to the stories of individuals who had been touched by the coalition's work, and to ensure that every program stayed true to its mission of empowerment and inclusivity. One day, while visiting a remote village in Southeast Asia, where the coalition had recently launched an educational initiative, Victor had an experience that brought his journey full circle. A young girl named Leela approached him, holding a small notebook filled with drawings and writings. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes and said, "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming here. Because of you, I believe I can do something great with my life." Victor knelt down to her level, his heart swelling with emotion. "You can, Leela," he said, smiling warmly. "You already have greatness within you. Never forget that." In that moment, Victor realized that his life's work was not just about building pathways. It was about instilling hope, about showing people that their dreams were valid and their voices mattered. He had come a long way from that painful day at the conference, but the lessons he had learned along the way had shaped him into the man he was now. His legacy was not in the buildings or programs he had created, but in the lives he had touched, the hearts he had inspired, and the people he had empowered to believe in themselves. As Victor returned home from his travels, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The Pathway Coalition was now self-sustaining, with leaders and volunteers around the world carrying forward the mission he had begun. He knew that even when he was no longer there to lead it, the coalition would continue to thrive, guided by the values of empathy, respect, and resilience that had been its foundation. In his final days, as he reflected on his journey, Victor felt no regret, only gratitude. He had taken the pain of prejudice and transformed it into a legacy of love and unity. He had shown the world that one person's courage could indeed ignite a movement capable of changing the world. And as he looked out over the world he had helped shape, he knew that his story would live on, not just in the Pathway Coalition, but in every person who dared to believe that they, too, could make a difference. Victor Thompson's legacy was not a monument or a statue. It was a million voices, rising together, united by a single dream. A world where everyone, regardless of their background, could stand tall, proud, and free. And as the Pathway Coalition continued to grow, touching lives across continents, his spirit remained a guiding light, reminding humanity of the boundless power of compassion, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that connected us all.